So let's finish the last part for the paper 1 discussion. We come to the discussion of the essay today. So most of you picked questions 7 and 8, but to be honest, both of the essay were not performed well this time. The highest mark is scores 8 out of 12, and quite a lot of you the mark is below 5. So first of all, don't blame yourself because you are not prepared well. To be honest, we are using the DSE standard, and I will push you to meet the grade. So that's why if your answer is not meet the standard, I won't give you a high mark as you expected. And quite a lot of you overlook the keywords in the questions, and you have write a lot of irrelevant ideas for both essays, and some very important ideas are missing in both essays. So that's why the essay performance for these two questions is not good as you expect. Now let's first discuss the answer for question 7. I won't highlight with you, so I just go through some key concepts, and you may mark down and follow me. So catch up some important idea that you all miss out in your answers. So let's start with question 7. Explain the impact of cattle ranching. So first of all, you need to have the clear understanding about the characteristics of cattle ranching. So you should know that this activity is a kind of pastoral farming. Some of you mix up with shifting cultivation and write down slash and burn. No, so this is not slash and burn, and it's a kind of commercial farming practiced by some TNC. So very clear, and this one is a very large scale. So that's why the impact is large to the rainforest. And the most important part is about the ecosystem processes. So many of you not understand about the meaning of ecosystem process. So for ecosystem, it's a very broad sense, cover everything happen in the rainforest ecosystem. But for the process, so recall your memory, actually only include two processes that refer to the relationship of the biotic and abiotic components. So the two processes are number 1, nutrient cycling, and number 2, energy flow. In our marking, we expect about 3 marks given to nutrient cycling and 3 marks given to energy flow. So your answer should be clearly show that you have covered 2 processes. Some of you can only cover one of them, just like nutrient cycling. So I can only give you 3 mark maximum. Quite a lot of you write down about the impacts on the 4 spheres. So sorry, this is not what we talk about the ecosystem process. So this part we call is IR. If I see any ideas about the impact on biosphere, hydrosphere, atmosphere, and lithosphere, so sorry, no mark will be given. So I only give mark on the nutrient cycling and the energy flow. So for the nutrient cycling, actually it's not difficult. So you start at the impact from the biomass. So it's the largest nutrient storage in the biomass. Because the practice of the cattle ranching, so they will make it a smaller biomass. And then there will also a smaller littering because of smaller trees left behind. So there will be less littering. So the litter storage also become less because they will have reduce the nutrient cycling, reduce the nutrient storage in the litter due to the because of the nutrient cycling inside the litter, they are all removed by the rapid decompositions, and also there will be more leaching. So why it become less? Because we have a greater leaching than before. So for the littering, so be careful. So there are less littering from the biomass. And then also there are more increased, not leaching, I marked it wrongly here, should be one off. So sorry, it should be one off. So there will be more from the one off. And also because they will first use the fire to burn and add the chemical fertilizer, they will increase in the short run. So this point I don't mark down, you can refer to the marking scheme. So the later it will transfer to the soil, but however, because of the increase in the leaching, loss in leaching, so the soil storage also decrease, and then we have a fewer plants uptake. Left behind, so the whole nutrient cycling at the end will become smaller than before. So this is the system, the whole nutrient cycling, the whole nutrient, whole process will have less nutrient than before. So there's a rapid nutrient loss due to the practice of cattle ranching. So you can refer to the details in the marking scheme. And why? Because the export of cattle, so the nutrient will lose from the entire ecosystem. And then for energy flow, so many of you are not familiar with the energy flow. So for energy flow, so there will be reduce the complexity of the food web. So there will be less complicated. So the food chain will be shortened. And of course, if you talk about the trophic level, there will be less trophic level, less amount of nutrient pass around. Less amount of energy pass to next trophic levels. So if you can discuss clearly about the impact of nutrient cycling and energy flow, so you can get at least 4. But so sorry that most of you can't know, don't understand about the meaning of ecosystem process. So you can only either talk about nutrient cycling or energy flow. So the mark is not high this part. So next part is about the role of the government, and the keyword is with respect to cattle ranching. The roles of government, you can see the word roles, 角色, okay, more than one. So for the roles, we will call as positive role and negative role. And all your measures should be respect to cattle ranching. So I just point out some example. So for the word roles, you have to talk about positive role, 一個正面嘅角色 to protect forests. Respect to cattle ranching. So many of you can write down a lot of measures, for example, like afforestation after cattle ranching. So for this measure, so I use short form. So afforestation is a measure, and then you match up with the key questions, cattle ranching. Or some of you mentioned about the license, okay, 發牌照啦, okay, to limit the scale of cattle ranching. Yes, all relevant. So when I see that a correct measure plus cattle ranching, okay, so I will put a tick for these measures. And some of you, your measure is correct, but no cattle ranching, so the point I will not count. So all your measures should respect to the cattle ranching. And then most of you skip the negative row. So for the government, sometimes they have a negative row to protect the forest, to conserve the forest. To cattle ranching. That means, in other words, they will encourage the cattle ranching. So that means they provide some favorable policy to promote cattle ranching. So for example, I think you all know about like some favorable policy like low tax rates, like the Brazilian government, or they protect some low interest loan, etc., or they improve the transport. So all this will promote the cattle ranching, and which is a negative role to protect the forest. It just encourages further deforestation. So in your answer, you must cover both positive and negative role of the government about the cattle ranching. Then you can get maximum marks. Okay, so be careful. Roles, positive and negative roles. So that's all for question 7. Now let's go to question 8. Question 8. So you can also refer to a video I'll post up later, okay, for mark down all the keyword and look at the marking scheme I passed to you. Now let's go to question 8. So last question, discuss the importance. So this word, so the importance, 重要性 of industrial activity causing CO2. So actually quite straightforward. Discuss the importance. You should talk about the importance of industrial activity that cause higher CO2 and the importance of other activities. So quite a number of you forget to talk about the importance of other activity that causing higher CO2. So for the importance of industrial activity, your argument is also not that full. So basically we have the use of fossil fuel, plus example coal, oil, etc. And then there are many production of nylons. So nylon will emit N2O. So like production in other like the production of other like the production in many of the chemical fertilizers. So they will also emit more CO2. So they will emit CO2. And for the industrial activity, so you can also include about the use of land. So include the deforestation, so the burning of trees. So they will emit the CO2, burning of trees. So for industrial land. So actually industrial activity, so we have not a lot of ideas, so you must talk about the importance of other activity that causing the increasing amount of CO2. So you need to emphasize the underlying cause. Underlying cause refer to the population growth, urbanization, higher living standard, etc. So all these will cause different other activity that increase the use of CO2, like the use of vehicles, And remember in your answers, so use comparative, increasing, more, higher for your answers. Like increase the using of vehicles, and then the agricultural activity. So that involves the burning of trees, etc. So all this will increase the emission of CO2. And for human activity in the urban area, we'll use of the incinerator. That will also cause the more increase the use of CO2. So in your answer, you must cover both importance of industrial activity and the other activity, so I can get the maximum mark for these questions. So I found that quite a lot of you only have a very short ideas, so that's why you can't get a high marks. And remember the word discuss importance, you must discuss importance of the questions. 咁就算你覺得佢要求個字咧唔係好多嘢講都好咧，你都盡量要寫到最多，先寫其他，因為一定要咁樣寫咧，先可以符合到題目嘅要求嘅重要性，其他嘅重要性。Discuss the importance of a measures and the importance of others. Okay, other factors. Now let's come to part 2. So for part 2, I think it's very poor. Evaluate whether technology transfer, so keyword technology transfer, among countries can effectively reduce the global carbon dioxide. So first of all, you need to give the definition for technology transfer with a lot of examples. And countries, which type of country involved, and how they can reduce. Discuss whether you need to take side. Your standpoint, how, why is it work or why not work, or any constraints. Okay, so now let's have a look for the what type of technology transfer. So in your answers, most of you can only mention about the transfer of renewable energy. So only one example, then full stop. Actually, there are many examples of any technology transfer. And this question is similar to DSC question 1 year about how technology can reduce the greenhouse gases. So don't just limit to your answer to renewable energy. There are so many type of technology they can transfer, like energy efficiency, 嗰個效能咯。Okay, electric car, also a new technology. Modern incinerator. So recall your memory, we have do a similar question before, even some building design, etc. And then how they can reduce CO2. And then for the country involved, so very clearly, we should involve the transfer from MDCs to the LDCs. So MDCs try to transfer the technology to the LDCs. And this is how they can help to reduce the CO2. But when we involve this kind of transfer, it's a kind of international cooperation. So we have some constraints, some limitations. So we call there some limitations to lower the effectiveness, whether they can transfer or whether they can effectively work out the cooperation. So we have some factor to consider. 咁可唔可以成功呢？一定有啲因素去考慮嘅 some factor to consider whether they can transfer. So we have something we should consider. It's about the willingness. So first of all, so they may not able to transfer due to the poor diplomatic relationship or keen competitions. So we can argue about the willingness due to the economic and diplomatic relationship. So the country may not willing to help, like US may unable or unwilling to help China for their emission cuts, or some of them is unwilling because of the responsibility. So they don't think that they need to help now the responsibility. So they don't think that it's a responsibility for MDCs to help. So they think LDC should bear the cost, not MDCs bear the cost of rising CO2, not MDCs. So they are not willing to cooperate. And for the technology transfer, similar to what we have learned in the international cooperation, so they are non-legal binding. So they may not really want to help, so they can't see their responsibility to help. And then sometimes we also argue about the LDCs. LDCs, they are not treasure the help from the MDCs. They are unwilling to accept. Okay, so LDCs, why they don't accept? Okay, I cross out this part. So the LDCs, sometimes they are unwilling to accept the technology transfer. Why? So sometimes because of their economic consideration. So they want the economic growth. So they prefer, coal. So kind of cheap raw material instead of using renewable energy. So they prefer the coal, the cheap raw materials for their industrial production. So they are unwilling to use the technology transfer from the MDC for emission cuts. So they don't prefer, they want instead of using the renewable energy, which will increase their production costs. So there are some reasons why they're not able or unwilling. Or sometimes we also argue that even though they have transfer, they are not able to develop well because of the costly of those equipment provided from the MDCs. So this point I think is compared to all the points is minor, because once transferred from the MDCs, so they should able to get at least the basic equipment for their use of the technology. But some LDCs, they may not able to run, as some of you may argue, but I think you need to argue very well why they cannot run or why they cannot operate the machines from the MDCs. So you need to think about why their cooperation cannot effectively reduce the greenhouse gases. Any constraints, okay, I use the word constraints, 限制, make them fail to transfer the technology to help each other. So overall for part 2, not very well. Your not many examples. Your idea is quite superficial. Okay, 好表面啦，唔夠深入去解釋嗰個合作唔到嗰個位咯。So that's why I can't give you high mark for this part. So learn in this exam, you will face the similar question, similar situation, how you can perform better.
of this kind of question. So that's all for paper 1. So check again your answers. Any questions or anything you're not clear, please raise up. You can send a message to me. So that's all for part 1 for paper 1.